Let's move over to this story, back to this story, where people are struggling in these financial times, but they're still buying new cars. New vehicle sales increased by double digits in June, according to the Automotive Business Council. Now, the sector saw a year-on-year increase of 14%. Let's speak now to the CEO, Mikel Mabasa. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, Mr. Mabasa. Now, according to your data, affordability seems to be driving new vehicle sales in June. Are people trading in bigger, more luxurious cars to buy new, smaller, affordable cars? What exactly is the data telling you about the new vehicle sales?
Yeah, absolutely. Good evening, Rofiwa. We have indeed seen a lot of customers beginning to trade off, bigger vehicles and moving into much affordable, smaller options, which have also become available at an industrial scale in the country, because we've seen an introduction of much cheaper and durable brands that are coming into the country. I think you may be aware that in the last couple of years, particularly post COVID-19, we've seen a number of new Chinese brands coming into the market, which are very competitive from a pricing point of view, and we've seen quite a number of those products South Africans moving into, and we've seen obviously an uptrade in those particular newer vehicles that are coming into the market, which is obviously a sense for consumers, because the inflation is obviously very high. Consumers are moving into brands that they can be able to spend less in terms of fuel, because obviously naturally big vehicles also consume quite a lot in terms of fuel. We've seen fuel increases in the last couple of months in the country, and people are obviously moving into those smaller vehicles in a very big scale.
Yeah, but our weak point is still in export sales, which is an important market for us as South Africans, dropping by over 12.5%. And that, of course, they said was due, partly rather due to the KZN floods that we saw earlier on. What are your thoughts on that export market, and when can we see that much needed uptake, if we will, anytime soon?
Well, look, I think our exports are actually in a very trickier position than ever before, because you'd recall, Rofiwa, that many of our export markets, particularly Europe and the United Kingdom, which is obviously out of the European Union now, have already indicated that they will be slowing down the uptake of internal combustion engines, because many of those markets are beginning to take new energy vehicles into those markets in a faster pace than ever before. So if you look at, for example, Scandinavian countries, where we've been exporting many of our vehicles into those markets, we've seen a very huge slowdown, particularly because those markets are definitely focusing more on importing electric vehicles into those markets. And South Africa, as you know, currently we are pretty slow in relation to the production of new energy vehicles in the market, and that is obviously beginning to have an impact on our capacity to be able to export more vehicles, specifically into Europe, because Europe is definitely one of our biggest markets. We currently, as a country, exporting to 152 different markets around the world, and many of those markets are already beginning to lower their emissions, and they're beginning to slow down, specifically in the uptake of internal combustion engines in those markets.
Yeah, and I just want to lament on that point a little bit more before we move on, that our uptake of the direction that the world is moving when it comes to reducing carbon emissions and creating electric vehicles. We saw a BMW launch that particular product with the X3. Do you think that we might see other car manufacturers go the same route and not necessarily wait for some kind of government policy intervention? Because, as you say, it's an important market, and we run the risk of the European Union finding a new supplier of these critical components.
Absolutely. So South African automakers have already taken that decision, that despite the fact that government has been moving at a very snail pace in terms of introducing new policies that supports new energy vehicles into the South African market, particularly in relation to production, car makers have obviously decided that they will move on their own, notwithstanding the fact that there's no solid government policy on these particular topics. In South Africa today, We have already have 3 automakers in the country who have already started producing new energy vehicles, and BMW announced last week, Wednesday, as the 3rd manufacturer that has moved into that particular space. And I think increasingly, we are certainly going to see many other markets and also many other automakers in South Africa moving on their own without, obviously, the government support. And when we spoke to many of them, they've indicated, obviously, about the fact that they are committed to this country. They are concerned about job losses, because if they do not evolve into the production of new energy vehicles so that they can be able to consistently serve those markets, obviously they will be left with no other option but to begin to shed jobs and obviously reduce their workforce in their plants and so on. So they're trying to mitigate against that particular risk so that they can really be able to continue to provide livelihoods and obviously, protect the current jobs that we have in the country, and certainly also continue to serve those markets where we are currently exporting our vehicles into.
Mikel Mabasa, as always, thank you very much for your time this evening. That is the CEO of NAAMSA giving us the breakdown of the vehicle sales, new vehicle sales that came through. People are buying new vehicles. They're just going for the more smaller, more affordable, fuel-efficient vehicles. And as you've just heard there, it's going to be important for us to start to move towards the electrical vehicles, and that is where our big markets are moving towards. And South Africa has been slow to come to that party.